Hi, I'm Dr. Caroline Leaf and welcome to my podcast, Cleaning Up the Mental Mess, a podcast dedicated to helping you take back control of your mind, mood, and mental health. In this fascinating episode, I interview neuroscientist, professor of psychiatry and human behavior, and diagnosed psychopath, James Fallon, on his incredible story, the neurological and genetic correlates of a psychopath, and the role of nature versus nurture. In this episode, we explore the shocking discovery that he realized after years of studying the brains of psychopaths that he had the exact same structure, and how with daily practice and intentional effort he learned how to be a good guy. We really get inside the mind of a psychopath. If you enjoy my podcast and want to know how you can help me continue making them possible, please consider subscribing wherever you listen and leaving a 5-star review. And please continue sharing this podcast with friends, family, and on social media. And now, on to today's interview. Life can be hard and it's easy to feel stressed, anxious, and out of control. What if there was a way to take back control? What if there was a practical way to detox your brain? This is now possible with NeuroCycle, the first ever scientifically tested brain detox app shown to help reduce anxiety and depression by up to 81%. Users are guided through a variation of audio and video, brain exercises, and mind management lessons every day. I'm excited to share some of the latest features in the app, including guides for children and parents, detailed feedback and recommendations, written guides through days 22 through 63 of the NeuroCycle, and an easy way to track your progress. There are over 500,000 NeuroCycle users worldwide, and the app has helped change thousands of lives, including people trying to find purpose in life, overcoming fear, better sleep, improved relationships, managing intrusive thoughts, depression and anxiety, and so much more. NeuroCycle is for everybody. No matter who you are, what you've been through, or what you do, you have an incredible mind and brain that is always on and needs to be managed so that you can live your best both mentally and physically. This app is designed for individuals, couples, families, businesses, or corporations, for everyone, everywhere. Join us by committing just a few minutes a day and see how your life is transformed. In just 63 days, you will have begun rewiring your brain for a happier and healthier life. Download the NeuroCycle app today and start changing your life one thought at a time. Just look for NeuroCycle on the iTunes App Store or Google Play, or visit neurocycle.app. The link and more information will be in the show notes. Professor James Fallon, I am really honored and excited to interview you today. Your work, I love your work. As a fellow neuroscientist, I'm absolutely fascinated with your years of interesting research, from stem cell research, work in psychiatry, work with sociopaths and psychopaths, and you have a phenomenal story. A lot of people know about you, and I'm very, very, very honored to have you on the podcast today. So thank you.
Oh, no, thank you, Caroline.
Wonderful. Well, before we start, can you tell us something about yourself? Just tell my listeners and my viewers about who you are. They've heard your bio, but it's always nice to hear it from the person. And tell us something that's maybe not in your bio. I know you've got such a great story. So,
well, I would say that, I was always interested in biology and the mind and all of that. I never remember not thinking about it all the time. So it's not like I had to, what am I going to do for a living? It's the same way my wife and I met, and as a girlfriend, I never had, who am I going to marry? I knew when I was 13, and I knew when I was 5 what I was going to do. So it was a natural sort of thing where, it's one of those kids that's always out looking for snakes and tadpoles and how things work, so that was always there. I didn't try to do anything. Many kids have this, and it's a great thing. You don't have to worry about what you're going to do, first of all. And you don't have to be motivated, because it's self-motivating, because there's a lot of things, but not only in the nanocosm of the brain and how that works, but, beyond that, to the 6 billion years of just amazing evolution and the whole cosmos. So, it's all, you try to get your arms around all of it and really try to grasp it. And in part of that, you always, it has a sense of, I don't know if it's spirituality, but religiosity, because I had obsessive compulsive disorder when I was young. And I was always obsessed with things that really had people worried, when I was just before going into puberty. But it helped me because I had OCD. I didn't have obsessive compulsive personality disorder. I knew there was crazy thoughts, but I couldn't control them. But I use that as it slowly went away. I still have it, but it just helps me finish jobs. I'm obsessive about finishing things. So it helps your, productivity. Also after that, I went into about 10 years of panic attacks. And this has to do, in my case, with temporal lobe serotonin dysfunction. And it was a wild thing. When I first got it, was maybe 17. And I had to be taken to the hospital. You see my heart coming out of my chest. And I never got it when I was around people or anything. It happened by myself in the middle of nothing. So it really wasn't a generalized anxiety disorder. Because I can get out, and I always, even as a kid, could stand in front of hundreds of people and just start yapping away. So it wasn't, and I wasn't anxious about things or places, but it would just out of nowhere in the middle of the night or the day. It's crazy. So that was terrifying because you think that you're going to die within 30 seconds to 2 minutes. You're convinced. And I've had almost 1,000 of these, about 850, 900 in my life. They've slowly gone away. And I know how to control them with a carotid massage to control my blood pressure and heart rate, which goes absolutely nuts. And it's always associated with this gloom and doom, but a feeling of great angst. Now, as this was happening, I think I was able to take that. Plus, I also had some mild bipolar, right? And the psychiatrists I know insist that I'm a bipolar that's always up. I'm never down. But bipolar is defined by the mania or hypomania in my case. And so, and it always gives you energy. So there's another thing, that mild bipolar, really heavy bipolar, it's an awful thing with mania, because then it's psychotic, or with the depression part. But the up part, I've treated as another friend because it gives me constant energy and motivation and a very positive feeling, even though I can be obnoxious to be around. There's all this happy face, happy. And but panic attacks really got me looking at sort of a very dark sort of part of fear, the universe, and not existing, all this stuff that a lot of people get. But I got so many of these. It was just ridiculous. And so that's something that really helped me. And so I think what's not in my bio is that, genetically, and as my two geneticists, and one's a psychiatrist and another psychiatrist, looked at my genetics, they said, you probably shouldn't have been born. You probably should have been a stillborn.
Oh my gosh. Those are nice friends.
This is science friends, right? Friends. This is funny to us, right? But they really said you have the interaction of all these genes, mostly monoamines. It looks very lethal. And I said, well, in fact, my mother had 4 miscarriages and stillbirths before I was born. So she had our oldest brother, and then 5 years, and then me. In between, there's all these miscarriages. So as a result of those miscarriages, I was treated by my family, which is a very large family on both sides, Sicilian and kind of like an English family, and huge. And so I was treated like the golden boy, not for anything I did, but just because I lived, And there's another thing where I have kind of a funky genetics, and some of it's unpleasant, but everybody's got stuff like this. But on the other hand, but it's mostly, I think, the attitude, the positive attitude that I didn't come up with. I think it's just naturally part of the problem, the wiring. And so each one of these I took as a gift and something to use to give me either drive or insight. And this has really helped. And also a breadth of interest, you know what I mean? And I hate to use spiritual, but it's religious because I don't even know what it means. And I have no sense of duality, which is part of one of the psychopathic traits, is you have no sense of duality. And so the real sense of right and wrong, I don't appreciate like most people, most definitely. And this is one of the traits that I have. But I don't think dualistically either, right? Because I don't even get it. It's like a blind person seeing for the first time, and you say, you really don't see. And so I think each of these things, and there's about 10 of these, I'm kind of wired for obesity, but for me, and my wife doesn't believe it at all. She just says you're a hedonist and you get lazy. So my weight goes up and down since I was about 21. After I stopped playing football and wrestling, I did downhill skiing. I was, competition skiing. And once I stopped that and we just did studying, then I really ballooned up and I lost weight. But each time I would go up and down almost 80 pounds every few years. This has been going on for my whole life. And I can lose weight easily, but I always put it back on. But I do love to party and be a hedonist. I love food and Cabernet and all that. So, to me, I don't think I'm really genetically fat, even though I have the genes for it. I rather enjoy it. I enjoy the going up and going down. The problem with all of these traits is that it can bother the people around you, right? And so it doesn't bother, these things don't bother me so much, but it bothers the people around me because it looks so fractious. And it can be upset when I get really fat. It's like, I'm kind of halfway to my perfect weight now. My wife doesn't understand what that means. Neither do I, but I say that. And so, for her, you want to have a mate was the thin guy, the stud married, and then I'm not, and I wasn't. But sometimes I am. 2 years ago, I was back to that guy. Now I'm like going up to Bloomsville. So, at any rate, I'm trying to give you, this is a very long answer, but I think the naturally positive attitude about all these things as challenges, things to overcome, and part of your toolbox, right? And part of it. So I think, sorry for the long answer, but...
No, it's great. It's great. What health looks like for you may be completely different to what it looks like for someone else. There is no one size fits all. This is why I love that Noom takes a different approach to health and eating. The program is driven by a singular mission: to help as many people as possible live healthier and happier lives through behavior change. It's not just about looking a certain way or keeping up with society's ever-changing standards. Noom focuses on helping you become healthier so you can love your best life. Whether this means having enough energy to play with your kids, do what you enjoy, or improve your mental and physical health. I enjoy the app's quick daily lessons, the information I learn about the relationship between what I eat and my health, and the flexibility of the program. Even if I miss a day or two or go on holiday, Noom makes it easy to get back on track. I love that you get to choose your level of support, from 5-minute daily check-ins to personal coaching. With their psychology-first approach, Noom empowers you to build more sustainable habits and behaviors. They use the latest in proven behavioral science to empower people to take control of their health for good. Through a combination of psychology, technology, and human coaching, their platform has helped millions of users meet their personal wellness goals. Noom is nourishing rather than restrictive. It doesn't believe in telling you what you can or can't eat. Instead, the program gives you the knowledge and wisdom you need to make informed choices that not only fit your lifestyle, but also help you reach your goals. Noom is specifically designed to help you find a sustainable way of eating that works for what you want and need, grounded in science. They've actually published more than 30 peer-reviewed scientific articles that inform users, practitioners, scientists, and the public about their methods and effectiveness. Stay focused on what's important with you with Noom's psychology-based approach. Sign up for your trial today at noom.com/Dr. Leaf. That's NOOM.com/Dr. Leaf to sign up today for your trial. The link and details will be in the show notes. Because what I'm hearing you say, as a mind researcher as well for 38 years, looking at this thing, there's one, you bring in nature, you bring in nurture, because I know that you have tremendous respect for your mom and how she really helped shape your life and that kind of thing. So the nurture, but there's the I factor. I always talk about the I factor, and there's the third thing that I think is the most important component. And that's what I'm hearing you say. You've taken all this genetics and whatever, and you've actually turned that into positive. You've directed this energy in a very positive way, and you've achieved tremendous goals, and you've actually fed back into the scientific research and helped people through directing who you are. I think it's fantastic.
And I think, some people, it may be harder for other people. For me, I just put my mind to something and say, I'm now going to do this. And I always do it. You know what I mean? If I put my mind to something, even if and it happens. But it's not it's just a natural trait. You know what I mean? It's nothing I do, it's just there. But the other thing you mentioned is, because of these genetics, in order for them to really turn against you in a bad way, you need some early epigenetic stressors, right? Between birth or even before birth up to 2 or 3 years old. So if you have a mix of genes that are coding for, let's say, certain personality traits, which could be extroversion, introversion, how aggressive you are, the type of empathy you have, all these things are genetically wired, but you can change that, the amount of them, because
Yes,
there are,
epigenetics.
yeah, and you can, because each of all those genes, it takes about 15 genes or so for each trait. It's not just one gene. So you get a mix of these high and low acting genes, one set from your mother, one set from your father. So that mix, which is a random sort of mix, will determine your basic genetic personality type and drives and traits. But then there are regulators. Okay, many of the epigenetic effects are not on the genes, coding genes, but on the promoters, insulators, and all these sequences that regulate that gene. And they're like brakes or accelerator on your car. So the car is like a gene, and you can increase it, slow it down, and everything. And those in a normal person will vary appropriately to the environment. Sometimes you got to be angry, sometimes you got to be aggressive, not all the time. But if you are abused or abandoned early in life, birth to two, especially birth to two, but also three and a little bit four, well, these promoters get fixed. It's like putting a brick onto the gas pedal. It's always on, so it's turned on at inappropriate times. I mean, there's a sexuality group of genes, but you're supposed to know it's supposed to be balanced, like you use it only at appropriate times, right? Which, determines the sociability of what you do. But if it's always turned on, it's completely inappropriate. Well, this is what happens. And so people are abused, when there's trauma early, what their adrenal gland releases is cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and that goes right to the frontal lobe, especially to the social and emotional parts of the brain up here. And that's where that cortisol will add a methyl group and fix those genes. And that's where the actual molecular epigenetic changes take place. Normally if you get sick, if you get the flu, you get a temporary turning on of your immune cells, and they get methylated, but after 2 or 3 weeks, they pop off and it goes away. So these come on and off. So this epigenetics occurs all the time, through your life, but depending on your needs at the time. But this early epigenetic marks right after birth that especially affect, it's kind of a read of the hostility or kindness of the world around you. So if you're surrounded by hostility, you grew up in a really bad neighborhood, well, you are faced with, bullying, abuse, you see terrible things all the time, and your brain appears to get fixed by the stressors, so that you're then, the only way you can survive is by being one of them, right? And so this fixes you. If you're going to exist, you better be tough as nails, you better be violent, you better be reactive, impulsive, all these things. So it can be appropriate for the environment you grew up in. So whether they're psychopathic or not, or inappropriate, depends on the environment you're in. It's not the same for each person or each environment. So at any rate, with those, it turns out when I was brought up by not only my mother, but my aunts, especially on my mother's side. They all, my grandfather had come from Sicily and lived on the streets in New York from the time he was 11, 12, 13, lived on the street, and really had to fend for himself. And when he finally met my grandmother, he met her. He was one of the things he did. He was a court interpreter for Sicilian and Italians coming to America and all that stuff, or in court cases, but he was also a musician. So we've got a lot of musicians in our family. It's probably from him, I'm not, but almost everybody in my family really jazz musicians, stuff, not me, but anyway. And a lot of it's from him. They have a natural sense of music. But at any rate, when he met my grandmother, she had come separately over from Sicily to New York just briefly and met him. He was playing a band. He was like a rock star, But it was like in that 1918 or 17, 16, that's when they met. And he was never educated. And he told her, my grandmother, he says, I want to have a lot of daughters and I want them all to go to college. His family never knew about college, right? But that was his goal, and he made it happen. So my mother and all my aunts, all of them went to college, and they all went to graduate school. This is back when this wasn't amazing, just amazing. And they were all really smart and very funny, but they all started out kind of as teachers and then went on to other business or whatever. But they all had a great insight, and they could read kids. And so my mother and my aunts, that matriarchy was fantastic because they treated all of their kids, me and my brother and my cousin, according to what that kid needed. They saw that they need. So it was a conspiracy of this matriarchy to make sure the kid is treated as an individual, depending on their read of what the kid needs. Some kids may need a smack in the head, some, are snowflakes. So they knew this stuff and were just so brilliant about it. And also my father and my uncles and my grandpa, they were all added to this in a very kind, wonderful, and interesting way. And so I was raised by angels, really very smart angels. And I think because of that, all of this really severe genetic combinations I have, because the genetics read like a full-blown, somebody very dangerous, right? And they knew this. And, when I went to school, grade school, and then junior high school, they said, keep this. They told my teachers, because they were teachers too. They said, keep this kid busy all the time, because if he gets quiet, he's trouble. There's going to be real trouble. And I was like, all the time, from the time I woke up until the time I went to sleep at 9:30 at night, from grade school on to this day, I'm like working constantly, doing something, in sports too. And so I think that insight, not of my own doing, this is just being lucky to be born into a family.
Into an environment that your genes. So what I'm hearing you say is that the nature that you had was messed up, but the nurture was kind of drowning that out and activating the good stuff, so that you could then, the I factor could come in, that you could actually then have the resilience to utilize the good nurturing to go in the right direction. Because you are famous for your work, not only on stem cells, but on psychopathy. And you've written that incredible book, The Psychopath Inside, a neuroscientist's personal journey into the dark side of the brain. So I just wanted for a moment for my viewers and my listeners just to understand that you're building the story behind the book and the researchers. So you've literally been your own subject. I mean, and been subjects in controls in other subjects, and you really have a deep understanding.
Science, you never make yourself your own subject.
But you kind of have been. You've been studying yourself for years, and obviously.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a big no-no. But nonetheless, it happened so by chance. My ex-students had become psychiatrists and neurologists. They were medical students of mine, but when I started, and we got a PET scanner back in like 1988, 89, one of the first ones, a very high resolution one. And so of all the things, a lot of the stuff we've done is on schizophrenia and bipolar addictions, all that. But they also, every month or two or three, would bring in a guy in manacles who was a killer, a murderer. A lot of times, killers, terrible guys. And all the police would show up, the SWAT team at the medical school, roofs and everything with submachine guns. At any rate, they brought them to me to analyze, the anatomy, because I knew the connections of the brain, and said, what's this? And I never paid much attention to it. It was one of many video games for me. I think the average person probably knew more about psychopaths or murders. It just wasn't a particularly, it was like anything. I was never interested, but these were my students, so I started analyzing it, and there weren't that many. Over the years, I didn't see a pattern because I wasn't really even looking. Then several of my colleagues in 2005 sent me a ton of these. They're all murderers, different kinds. Impulsive murderers, brain damage murderers, psychopaths, sociopaths, all these different types. I said, look, send them to me, all the scans that I could read, right? These that I could and try to impute or determine what the connectomes, that is, connected brain areas that seem to be associated with all the different types. So I said, don't tell me. I said, throw in normals and schizophrenics, so you fool me. Because, that's one of the rules is to make your analysis as blind as possible, because even with scientists, you don't want to make up a story, but we're storytellers, right? In our visual system, we like narratives and stories. And any little hint in there that, this is a psychopath, I got to look for a psychopath pattern. So you can't. So
colors the research. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I said, just don't tell me. And I went through that and spent some time and analyzed them, and found out there was like 4 very neatly separated, perfectly separated piles of scans. And it turns out, there's a whole group that was normal, in which I could tell pretty quickly. Then there was a whole group of schizophrenics, and I knew the different schizophrenics because I've analyzed so many. And so there was schizophrenics, and then I knew the bipolars. And then there was this 4th group, which was a mixed bag, but at the base of it was what we call common mode. That is, if you draw a Venn diagram, what they all had in the center was the areas of the brain turned off that have to do with the moral reasoning with impulsivity with psychopathy. And so that's areas that are over the eyes, the orbital cortex and the amygdala and insula, this whole limbic system, this emotional, social, emotional limbic cortex. And that was the pattern. And I said, my God, there's something here. So I became interested, right? And then I started talking to people. So my first chapter on this, I think it was the first to show the whole pattern, right? But I didn't follow it up because we're doing so many other things, really. I didn't want to, if you commit to, let's do Psychopaths now, it's like 5 to 10 years of complete commitment. So I didn't want to do it, right? It was like, okay, here, somebody else who could do it better, and they did. But the basic pattern was there. So I saw that. And then I started talking about it. And I gave a couple of talks. And then from 2005, 6 to 2008, 9, at that time, at the end of that time, the TED people asked me if I wanted to give a talk. And I said, well, yeah, I have the stem cell story about the bias against adult stem cells because people wanted it. The funders wanted embryonic stem cells, all this stuff, and about the bias in science. And they, oh, that's good. Do you have anything more interesting and personal? And I said, okay, and I shouldn't have done this, right? This was another mistake, but you lose your mind a little bit because you get into the story. And that story was, I said, I got all these scans to look at. And at the same time, we were doing an Alzheimer's study on the genetics and the brain patterns of people with Alzheimer's to determine the missing gene, which we found. It's called TOM40. It's TOM40 interacting. So a very successful experiment, but we ran out of normals. So I recruited, out of desperation, my whole family, including myself. I said, well, let's do this. We'll do the genetics because we needed it to write the grant, the patents, and all this stuff. This is the second thing you're not supposed to do. You don't work on yourself and you don't get your family involved. But, so I did that. And in doing that, when I was brought the results and I looked at it and the technicians brought all these scans because I had all these murder scans on my table that I just going through and checking. And they bring in my family scans. It was a pile of these printouts, with all the red color, the blue, this is too active, this is not active enough, and all the differences with normals and all this stuff. And so in looking at that, I went through and they all quickly, I knew that they looked pretty normal. So I was very happy. And then I got to the last scan and I looked at it and I said, okay, guys, it's very funny, the technicians. I said, you slip one of the psychopaths in here. I know what you're doing. You busted my chops. And it's very funny. And they said, no, that's one of your family members. I come on. I said, they swear to God. And I said, check the machine, computers, the machine, all that. And they came back and both of them, they said, we're not kidding this time. This is somebody in your family. So I said, so I had to break. I said, look, somebody in my family is dangerous walking around in open society. This is like a pure psychopath pattern. And so I had to break the code,
Yeah, break the double blind, yeah.
When I broke that, I peeled back the name and no name was on there. It was mine. So
that was that in 2006, I think that happened, wasn't it?
Yeah.
When you did that, yeah.
Yeah, to that. And then we followed up with the genetics, the same thing. And all my brothers and my wife and everybody had a mix of different genes, high aggression, low aggression, high emotional empathy, low, all these different things that people normally had to make them normal. And I got again to the last group of genetics. I said, oh man, it was the same thing because I had all the genetics of all the warrior genes, extreme aggression, 0 genes, there's about 15 of them for emotional empathy. I had the genes for cognitive empathy, but not emotional empathy, which is usually what people want. That's what they think of empathy as this kind of, when you're crying, I'm crying, you're happy. You actually feel what the other person feels, and it's what you want in a mate and a best friend. You move together. The other kind, this other major kind of empathy is cognitive empathy, which is, I know what's bothering you. I don't feel it, but I know what it is. That what people are feeling, but you don't feel it. And so I have a lot of that. And that explained why people from the time I was young, especially
why they did what they did. Mm-hmm.
Like my wife's friends, their girlfriends were always coming to ask me what they thought. They had problems because they knew I would never cry and I would just listen to their problems. And this has been going on my whole life, which is I'll listen to problems, I just never get emotionally involved at all. And this can be somebody very close to me. But I can give a sort of a clear
perspective.
yeah, sort of analysis. And people always appreciated that. So when I got this years later, this is back in like 2008 now, almost 2009 with the genetics. And I said, well, here it is. And it fit with my PET scan, which showed that the area of the brain that codes for cognitive empathy in the anterior insula and its connectome was very, shining bright there. And all the areas having to do with emotional empathy was turned off. And so there were all these different traits that went along with the genes, that went along with the brain pattern that said that I was 100% wired as a psychopath.
This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp Online Therapy. A lot of us will drop anything to go and help someone we care about. We'll go out of our way to treat other people well, but how often do we give ourselves the same treatment? One of my resolutions for 2022 is to treat myself like I would my best friend. And one way I'm going to do this is to spend more time doing the things that make and bring me joy, such as walking my 2 puppies or reading novels in the bath. Therapy is another great way we can take care of ourselves. Indeed, you don't have to be in a crisis mode to benefit from therapy. Therapy can provide preventative and protective strategies so that when things do get tough, you'll know what to do. It's one of the best gifts you can give yourself. And this month, BetterHelp Online Therapy wants to remind you that you matter just as much as everyone else does. And therapy is a great way to make sure you show up for yourself. BetterHelp is online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can be matched with a therapist in under 48 hours. Give it a try and see why over 2 million people have used BetterHelp Online Therapy. Cleaning Up the Mental Mess listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/Dr. Leaf. That's betterhelp.com/Dr. Leaf. The link and details will be in the show notes. So what we have here is a story of a brilliant scientist, neuroscientist, who spent years researching, who actually by default, literally by mistake, landed up in a study as a control, and in the control, the very pattern that you'd identified through SPECT scans, through genetic analysis, etc., to show that the different types of empathy, there's the 4 different types of empathy, you had the actual genes and the parts of your brain where that were literally switched off. So you had the typical pattern of a psychopath.
100%.
100%. And then you laid the whole foundation for our listeners in the beginning about how, as a child growing up, you had this incredible nurturing. So you were painting a picture of, even though biologically you have the pattern of a psychopath, your nurturing and your I factor changed that. And you've a happily married man with children, very successful scientist, and you've actually channeled that potential dangerous psychopathic tendency into something very constructive and contributed tremendously to humanity. And almost by default that you actually did this because you were into stem cells and into other areas of research.
Really by mistake, just a series of weird things. I mean, and part of that was a good summary, by the way, Carol. Excellent.
Good. Okay. And I need you to also just one more thing. Define for my listeners, and then we can continue with the story, because you're quite right. Scientists are stories and storytellers. So just define for us quickly, just so that they have a good understanding of what you're going to say next. Define a psychopath versus a sociopath, and then can we talk about the 4 types of empathy? So just very quickly, we can handle that, which will then give them something to hang on to for the rest of your story.
Yes, and for psychiatric disorders, there's all different types. There's thought disorders, emotional disorders, there are addictions. So there's all these different, too many, but that's how it goes. And one group are called the personality disorders. Personality disorders are different than regular disorders that sound like that. So if you have obsessive compulsive disorder, you have these compulsions that are crazy. You can't get them out of your head, but they're crazy. See, somebody who has obsessive compulsive disorder, personality disorder, they think that those are correct ideas. So the difference between somebody with these just regular disorders, which are completely annoying, and the personality disorder part of that are quite different, because the personality disorders, they think that, these are correct. So one group of those personality disorder are called the cluster Bs. Now, the cluster Bs are the most obnoxious, and the main one is antisocial personality disorder, also sort of called psychopathy, and also histrionic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder. These are the ones that are really dangerous to other people. Most of these disorders are bad, awful for you and maybe your family. But these, if you've got them, you're perfectly fine with them. It's like, there's nothing wrong with me. I mean, I'm right, I am the greatest, and or whatever those traits are. But you believe them, and these are the cluster Bs are the dangerous ones. So the main one that's the most dangerous, most associated with violence, murder, rape. But more than that, it's just somebody who's always manipulating people, and it's a game for them, and it gives them pleasure. And so even if it has nothing to do with money or sex or killing them, you're always messing with them. And every time you meet somebody, and you really can't control it at all, right? And I have this. I never try to do anything harm to people. I don't use it for anything, but I'm always on the make in this sense. And my wife always knew this. She goes, "You're doing that thing again." Because over there telling stories, I said, "But the stories are true." She said, "No, but you're manipulating these people." So she really knew. And it kind of pissed her off because I'd always go to a bar or a party and always be surrounded very quickly by young gals, young women, and I'd be telling them stories. Not because I look like I should be somebody to talk, for a young gal to talk to, but I had stories and they came off as credible and very interesting, and they were true. And so, but it would drive her crazy. Well, this is the thing, is somebody like that, it's really has put her and other people off, but it happens completely naturally. Now, the other thing is I can read because of this cognitive empathy, I can read what they're feeling. And I can use that to work through, to be able to read them and then have them play my game.
So that's the cognitive empathy versus emotional empathy. Cognitive empathy is more the seeing another perspective, whereas emotional empathy is feeling the other person's emotions.
I'm really caring about them. So it comes across as being cold, and in a way I am cold because I'll just do it, do that and analyze, if you will, friends or people who ask me, because I can, and I think probably I get a buzz out of it. It's just instinctive, but I don't feel their joy or pain at all, really. It's weird.
But you're able to analyze yourself, you're able to self-regulate. You have enough self-awareness that you can actually analyze that you've got cognitive empathy, but not the compassionate or the emotional empathy. And you can actually see what you're doing. You're very aware of it.
Once all this biological data, the scans and the genetics came through, then I had this analyzed, right? Psychiatrically analyzed, and a couple of psychiatrists, some of who really knew me well anyway, they knew all the stuff, the pranks I'd pull. So one of them summarized it in this way, very briefly. So here's a guy who has all the traits of a full-blown psychopath. All of them. He simply never acts them out. And I don't. You know what I mean? I don't act out what people would find, the aggression or anything. I don't hurt or flee, right? I can get mad, but I can always control my anger. Nobody, you can't get to me, right?
Sorry to interrupt you, but doesn't that go to the fact that your I factor, you've overcome your biology? You've actually utilized your biology for good.
Exactly. Probably that's true. And the one psychiatrist said he's never seen that in somebody that had all the traits but could absolutely control it. And it was curious, right? Now, because I have no ill intent. I'm not mad at anybody, but also I have no reason to steal money. I have no reason to go out and pick up women, and I have a wonderful. So it just so happens I have all these psychopathic traits, but I have a wonderful life. There's no need to. It'd be stupid. It's like these guys, like psychopaths who do this stuff, well, complete losers. I mean, you have to do it. Can't you just go into a bar and tell stories or something?
Yeah, channel it in the right direction. So you've actually got it. That in itself is a breakthrough, just how you've managed that, because a lot of people will ask, and that's one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, can it be overcome? But you demonstrate that obviously the factors were playing, the dice was rolled in your favor, and that you had the nurturing. But there are people out there that I bet you, if you go and do all the analyses, you're going to find they have the same combination of psychopathic tendencies, and they're not murdering people. They also have channeled that into to being leaderships.
Yeah, borderline. Sorry to keep you're asking great questions. I just want to answer them.
No, go for it.
And so there are, most psychopaths don't kill or maim or rape or do any of that stuff, but they manipulate. They all manipulate, especially borderlines like me, is full-blown psychopaths. That score like 40, 35 to 40, and 32 to 40 on a hair test or on the PPP for regular people. Not, they're very dangerous people, right? Some borderline psychopaths, I score under 30. So technically, I'm not a psychopath. I just get that close. I'm not, that close, but apparently enough.
But then scales do have variability, so and things do change. So yeah.
So being lucky enough not to need to do this stuff, right? I mean, that's part of it, but also being brought up in a nurturing way. So I take all of those things, all senses of aggression, I turn it into, how I play sports and how I play bridge and Monopoly and Scrabble. I'm very aggressive and pain in the ass to play with because I have to win all the time. So there is that, there's that residue there. I wouldn't even let my granddaughter beat me in Scrabble. It's really, it's bad. They're all good at it. They can all play. They're all great at this stuff.
And they're all going to beat you. They're all going to. That's going to be their goals to beat you. So.
And of course, I'm hoping for that, but I'd never let them win anything. Anyway, you can take that either way. But also, when after this happened, I got analyzed. I asked to do this TED Talk. I gave that TED Talk and talked about this, and that led to hundreds and hundreds of interviews and talks at Google Zeitgeist and Google Camp and CNN, PBS. I mean, everything you can imagine. The only news group, the only system that's never asked for an interview is Fox. They're the only ones. I mean, all over the world, because I've done so many. Yeah, it's hilarious. And a friend of mine who's a really very well-known producer, up in LA, he goes, well, he said, Fox, he said, to them, because I do, done interviews with the people that do like medical stuff on Fox. They said, well, see, to Fox, biology and medicine is like what antibodies are coming out to treat this, COVID. It's all very practical sort of stuff. Not what we're talking about.
Not what we're talking about deep stuff. We're talking about
that's right.
Stuff that is very important to talk about because we have to also, because it explains so much about human nature. And I think what's really appealing to people about you is the fact that you take your own story and you've turned that around into something that you can learn from and everyone can learn from. It's almost like you're fascinated with yourself. And I think people love that. But it's also very
narcissistic. You're right.
Yeah, it's also you not only so much that is that you've actually give people hope because it's at the back of people's minds, and that's one of the questions I wanted to ask you. People are very drawn to whenever, as you know, negative things draw people's attention, and I mean I have my own theory on why that happens, but I'd love to hear your theory on why people are so fascinated with watching murder stories and listening to murder and focusing on why do people do evil stuff. That absolute fascination. Can we talk a little bit about that? And I also want to talk.
I think, there's the. Let me take like an example of anybody who's seen the first Mel Brooks film, which is Mrs. Soulful, and with Diane Keaton. And Miss Soulful, he's in for murder in this jail in Pennsylvania back in the 19th century, and the wife of the warden, he falls in love with him and runs away with him, and it ends poorly. And it's this idea in storytelling that people want to be a lion for a day. And the lion for a day, and this attracts women because they, a lot of times, regular normal women, almost every women are normal, they're all different, but nonetheless, they want to lead like a righteous, productive life, have a family, but in the back of their mind, they all want to have that devastating affair, that one day where they do something so crazy. And a lot of times it ends poorly, right? So they want to be a lion for a day. That drive for freedom, if you will, and to be crazy. And it's partly sexual, but it's partly just breaking away any shackles whatsoever. I think that's part of the draw, especially for young women and even older women. That's really, that plays into it because they want to have that one day where they hope they don't get caught. But it doesn't end well too many times, and so that's not a great positive thing, but I think it's one of the drivers why people are fascinated. Most of the people who are fascinated by far are young women. So teenage women, I always get calls from groups of teenage women doing papers up through about 35. And they're just fascinated with the psychopathy and they watch all these shows. They know more about them than I do. I mean, I'm an advisor on some of these shows, these crime shows, right? And they know more than I do. I really do. So I say, you tell me. But I work with the writers and the producers to try to get it right, to try to get these characters, which I did with Bryan Cranston once at Soho. He and I talked about, I must have about 1,000 people about these characterizations of bad guys because he just finished Breaking Bad. Anyway, he was great about it. Very, really cool about it. So anyway, so that's a simple answer to one of the what draws us to it. But also in everybody, we all have those genes which drive us to break free and to experiment sexually and be angry. So everybody has the drive and they feel it. And that how do you feed that monkey? Because most people they're inhibited. They say, I'm not going to do it. But I'm not going to just take control. But this builds up and it's always in the back of their mind. Well, how do you safely process that and deal with that? Well, you watch a lot of murder films and murder, you're very fascinated with killers. I mean, awful people. And I've dealt with these and all these some rapists and pedophiles I've talked to. I mean, it's unbelievable. But there is a drive to get close enough to it to smell it. You know what I mean? But be safe. And of course, film, TV is a safe way to do it. And you can still sort of, it's like seeing a scary movie. You can still get that buzz, epinephrine and the epinephrine buzz, norepinephrine buzz, but stay safe. And so just for a moment, you're a lion for a day. So I think that's a part of this. I'll stop there because maybe, okay.
And that's for male and female. Would you say that that's male and female?
Well, males are sort of encouraged to be naughty early, more than young girls. That's sort of social process for thousands of years and where they're raised. Now, the boys have the same sort of things and everything, but they're allowed to go further, right? And they're allowed to experiment, and everybody knows that the boys and men are stinkers, basically. And, if they do it a little bit, okay, don't do that again. For a girl, she can get pregnant or she can get really in trouble and it could end her life or, end her productive life. Well, a guy, there's always like, well, okay, we'll give you one more chance type of thing. We see there's less forgiving for women. So I think for guys, there's the same process going on. But guys can have, in growing up, they can get closer to it and sort of become involved with that. And in fights and in sports that are really, some women do this, of course, but I mean, on the whole, and so it can always be sort of supercharged and then dealt with and released by the behavior, or in the case of many people watch film and getting all, amped up and nervous and crazy like that. And so I think that's part of the attraction, but it's also that inner drive, like, I know I'm a bad girl inside. I know it, and I want to know more about this. So how do it's make me crazy? And they don't realize that everybody's got that, right? They're having that thought. And so that the devil inside is how do you process with it? How do you deal with it? And I think the fascination with serial killers, with the shows, the movies and everything is a way to deal with that.
Interesting. So it's inside of us, and it's a way of processing by watching this. Now, I would come at it from, would you like my point of view?
Absolutely, yes.
So as from the mind work I've done, I come at it from another angle, that the empathy and being wired for love, for want of another term, is our norm. So when something out of the norm happens, it attracts our attention. And it's like, how could that? Because it's so out of the norm. And that's what draws us to the serial killer and the...
Be in line with that anything different catches our attention.
Yeah.
It's a fundamental perceptual thing. Anything you keep seeing over, you kind of erase. Anything different, different.
You notice it.
Yeah, because something fundamentally true, yes.
So people, for example, on a Facebook or Instagram comments, people ask me this all the time in the work I do. There'll be 50 great comments and 2 negative, but the people will ignore the positive and focus on the negative. And I always give that answer, that it's so abnormal. That's why it's drawing your attention. It's like, how can people think like this? The current things that are going on with racism and the awareness now, it's just this, how can people do this kind of, because it's so out of the norm.
Yeah, so society has a constant train wreck. A car wreck, you're always, where's this going? What is this about? We're naturally drawn to it, but, we're wired to be drawn to it because these are things that can harm us, right? And you better know about it. And so if you don't have that, you're completely naive. And then
exactly, you're in danger's way. So there's the wiring part. So you've got to learn about it. So there's a fascination to learn about it for protective instincts, for kind of getting rid of that toxic energy or that whatever, and then also because it's so out of the norm. So there's a multiplicity of reasons why we get drawn to it.
And some of it's wired very early. This is why Plato was correct. Socrates, Aristotle, everybody. Well, for the last 2,500 years, what most of you have been handed is not true. And Plato has it. We're born with these things. He didn't know about genes, but he knew about instincts and about those ideal things that are in our head. And he turns out over the past 15 years of neuroscience and cognitive science, we know that he was right, because when you're born, you have an innate sense of beauty. You don't have to be shown what beauty is. An innate sense of fear, an innate sense of swimming, right and wrong morality. You don't have to be taught this stuff. And it will normally develop. You don't have to be taught. So people, especially parents and then teachers in society, churches, synagogues, government, they always say, we're going to create you. And you're not going to create. All you can do is screw that kid up. You're not going to help him. That kid has been a free run. Okay. And just don't harm the kid. That's the thing. You're not going to help them. Just let them go, let her go, and be themselves, and they'll be fine. That's, not everybody will, because there are some things that happen, but by far, letting them be themselves is really the most productive thing to do. And because we're all tuned different, and our sense of danger and interest is different, well, you find that niche, and that helps you survive and thrive and really enjoy, the planet. And so, yes, I agree with everything you're saying. And those things work together for sure. I mean, there's a bit more to it, but not too much more than what we're saying. I think we put our arms around a large chunk of that.
Are you missing out on your favorite show because it's not available in your region? Trying to keep your private time private? Well, let me introduce you to NordVPN. If you're bored with Netflix, why not take it for a spin in the UK? Using NordVPN and a click of a button, you can do just that. No need to travel to Japan for your favorite anime when NordVPN brings it right to you. With 5,000 plus server options, no show is out of your reach. Using my link, http://nordvpn.com, cleaning up your mental mess, you can receive a huge discount on a 2-year plan plus 1 free month. Of course, you all love to watch our favorite TV episodes at once, but privacy is a big deal too. NordVPN keeps your information encrypted so that you never have to worry about your IP or location getting out. They've also doubled down on keeping you safe with their new threat protection feature. Say goodbye to intrusive websites and malware, even if you download an infected file. Threat protection kicks in and deletes it before it makes a mess of your computer. Don't forget, there's literally no risk to you with their 30-day money-back guarantee. Give it a try, and if you like it, great. If you don't, they'll issue a refund and you can pretend the entire situation never even happened. Check out my link at http://nordvpn.com/cleaning up to get your subscription started today. The link and details will be in the show notes. I think that's fantastic how you've explained that, and I think it's also just what you said, the nurturing thing in the beginning, the way you painted your story, the way that the matriarchy and your patriarchy in your life brought you up was to allow you to find yourself, but also to give you boundaries, that recognizing what you needed and allowing you to function within that, and enabled you to direct your energy in the right way and to use your traits in the correct way. And you ended up being a massive contributor to society, but it could have gone the other way if, as you say, you were abused emotionally or didn't have those needs met. So it sounds what you were saying, someone who's got that psychopathic or sociopathic, which is, and maybe you could define that for us, but if you have either of those tendencies, nurturing is incredibly important to help release the ability to direct that energy in the right direction. And you talk about leaders as well and having those kind of tendencies. So could we do that just in I mean, there's so much we can talk about, but just to kind of bring this discussion, our first of many discussions, I hope, to an end. Let's talk about the difference between a sociopath and a psychopath. And
every group has a different definition. They're all different. I'll tell you
I see that, yeah. That's what I'm asking you.
And it's more Cleckley, and this goes back a long way. That person who described it first, Cleckley, wrote first about psychopaths. But the idea is, the way to look at it is what we've been talking about as a psychopath. Now, is psychopathy, these personality disorders. You think you're right. You think your thoughts and what your actions are the right things. In that sense, they're moral, right? Because so I do this, and a lot of psychopaths do terrible things. They'll not think that's immoral, because there's no morality there. So they think it's it's just what happened, and so the psychopaths who are created early, and you have to have the right set of genes, and then be abused or abandoned early. That combination will then set up a lifetime of terror, and And it can either be narcissistic personality disorder or psychopathy or some other pernicious thing. But that's wired early. And so the kid ends up thinking their urges and actions and thoughts that are very antisocial are okay. And so in that sense, they're not immoral at all. A psychopath's not immoral. And when they do something, there's no sense of anxiety or remorse. A psychopath's caught doing something and they get away with things with the police, anybody, because they have no tells, because they don't feel really guilty. So they'll say, and so they get away all the time, either from being caught by a mate. It's the old line of who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes, right? But also with the police and everything. And I knew growing up, one of the things that I think some of the adults around me saw from the time I was young, I would do things. We'd just get involved in stealing cars. We'd always bring them back, simonized and full of gas and everything. We did all these, a lot of things, starting fires and everything. But it was never with an intention to harm, but it was there, right? And I never had a sense of immorality, but other people did, right? And so there's something wrong with you. And what was wrong? Not that I was a little boy being a bad boy, making, explosives and doing all sorts of stuff. It was that I thought it was okay, in which I really did. It was just for fun. I was having fun. Now, so when I got caught doing things, and it would always, one of those guys that would organize over teenagers and in college, hundreds and thousands of people to mob around and move around and torment the cops. And this happened all the time, but it was never to cause destruction ever. Right? But it was fun. This was like fun.
You saw it as fun. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it would bother me if I thought somebody's going to get hurt. So it was all, but people do get hurt, right? And to me, it was like, oh, those are the odds. That's the way cookie crumbles. So whenever that would happen, and I'd be caught with the others, they'd interview me because they said, well, he's the ringleader. And I'd talk to him and make cops laugh, and they'd always let me go. And the other friends, we'd spend the night in the cooler because I didn't have any anxiety, any sort of lying tells. Like, I didn't care. That's a key thing. This makes psychopaths, one of the things that makes them so dangerous is that they don't have tells, or it takes a long time to find those tells. Expert liars and manipulators. Now, and they show no remorse. There's no remorse, no guilt or anything. And what they think they're doing is a matter of morality. It's not even a factor. Now, a sociopath is usually something like the young loser, the person who thinks he's a young loser. He's mistreated. He's bullied. He could be, or she could be 8, 10 years old. They may or may not have the genes for this, but they're bullied early and they spend the rest of their life getting even with the world. Or the person or group of people who they see as causing them and their family or their country great pain. This is where terrorists come from. This is where the sociopaths are. They always say, because there's a reason for it. And when they're caught of doing something, they do have remorse. They do have anxiety. They're easy to catch. But what you often see is like an older psychopath gathering up young, pissed off kids, right? Teenagers. That's what Charlie Manson did. They always tried. I remember in creating the story in the news cycle back then with Charlie Manson, these are just your average middle-class kids. They weren't at all. These were prostitutes. They're all druggies. But they tried to make it seem like this is your kid next door. They weren't. And these were people who, like Charlie, was abused early and came from some bad genetics. We don't know, but we can tell by everybody in his family. He was a psychopath, probably. We don't have the scans and everything. But the people, his family, were sociopaths. And they were pissed off they're going to get even with society. A lot of times when you find that for like these kids, these shooters, well, they'll go and find their tormentors. And it could be little geeks, and so they go get all the football players. Or they get, or they'll hate people that they see as their tormentors. So if there's the good-looking country club guy, even though he's never done anything, he represents that kid in college that either A, wouldn't date me, or B, bullied me, or all of these things. So they become icons and memes in their head, and they spend the rest of their life hating him and getting even. The guy, a young boy, always liked a little blonde girl with the hair part in the middle, and she embarrassed him, and they wouldn't go out. Nothing. Here's the guy that's going to go around making life very difficult for blondes with their hair part in the middle, because these are the tormentors. That's more the sociopath. Sometimes those can be treated. They can be treated with cognitive behavioral therapy, and not all of them, but then they tend to grow out of it. Psychopaths pretty much is untreatable. I know there are a couple of groups who say, well, it's treatable, but it's never lasted. You can temporarily change. It's like watching Oprah Winfrey gain and lose weight over 40 years. You can't say she doesn't have a great mind and a great willpower. She does, but she goes through the cycles, and this is true with people with with psychopathy and sociopathy. They'll go through cycles of this need to maim and manipulate, and it follows like a rhythm in their crime sprees. And so there is this imperative, almost like it's an addiction they have to fill. And so and these are the real dangerous psychopaths and sociopaths. These are not the people in the bar that tries to pick you up with swooning you with stories and that. And there's a lot of those, or the person at work who's always messing with people. But they can be psychopaths, and that's where you're going to find them. But they may not be full-blown, fully dangerous ones that can end your life. So now looking at that, in my personal case, because you had asked me this before and I didn't answer it, is like, how did I deal with this? So once I had been diagnosed and had all of this, I went to the two psychiatrists who I work with closely, and they say, what do you think now that you know this? I said, I don't care. I don't give a shit. They said, that's your problem. You care. You don't care. You really don't care. And I don't. Okay, so that's the coldness of it. Part of the coldness of it. I really don't care. It's not that I don't care about anything, but I don't care about that. So what I tried to do, now knowing enough about this and being enough of a narcissist and a jerk, in a way, my wife has other names for it, but and we've been together forever since we've been 13 and married forever, kids and grandkids. So, and she understands she's a very strong person. So to her, I'm like the other pet dog that's a misbehaving pet dog in the family. And then sometimes I won't slobber or anything or embarrass her. So, but at any rate, so what I said I'm going to do, and I thought to myself, now that I had been diagnosed and I came back, I'd given a talk with the Prime Minister of Oslo, his bipolar in Oslo, and showed how we do it, how we have these techniques to find out the genetics and for these different disorders. And that's when I first found from all these psychiatrists who heard the talk, this public talk I did with the Prime Minister. They said, you know something, first of all, you probably have bipolar and you don't even know it. He said, you're just up all the time. I go, right about that. But he said also, we want to talk to you afterwards. So I went and met with them after the talk for about 3 or 4 hours, and we were drinking together. And they all were just kind of analyzing. At the end, they said, you're probably really close to being a psychopath. It's the first time I took it seriously. This first time. And all the other times, so when I came back home, I said, I'm going to fix this. I said, I'm so good at what I do. This is a narcissism. I'm so confident. I'm going to use my own narcissism to beat myself. So I'm going to be I'm going to be the predator myself. And this is what really went on. I said, I'm going to beat this. But it wasn't me trying to be good. It was me trying to win, except that I was the enemy this time, or the opponent. And so I spent the next couple of months every day in my interactions with my wife, making sure, because I started to study my friends who were in the same position as me and noticed that they were doing good things selflessly, and without anybody noticing. And I said, they're really doing it for good. And they're not doing it to get anything. There's no con there. So I said, okay, now how do I do this? So what I did was I watched what they did, and they were good roommates. They're good mates, not just good lovers or husbands or something like that. But they were, when it came time to clean up, they would help to clean and cook. And when I poured the wine, when I'd pour wine for myself and then the bottle at my wife, I started to do the opposite. I started to pour hers, wait, and were patient. I went on every day, and I had to cognitively do it and force myself, and was driven mostly by narcissism, but also kind of as an experimental test subject, just the science of it, right? And could I do it? Could I do it? And so I spent a while doing that. And after 2 months of doing this, which was doing other things too, not just roommate friends, when she maybe had her aunt died. I'd go to the funeral. I never do that. I would always get up, get an excuse and end up at a bar down in Newport Beach. It's a dive bar down there, and tell them, well, I had a heart attack or something. And I started to go to all of these events that a normal person goes to. Funerals, wakes, pains ass things to me. And I started to do all of them. Well, at the end of 2 months, she goes, what the hell has come over you? I said, what do you mean? She goes, well, you're like a really nice guy. She says, you're like the guy I knew, when we were 16 or 12 or 18. You're like a really nice guy. And I said, look, I call her D. Her name's Diane. I said, don't take it seriously. This is just an experiment. I'm trying to see if I can do this and to manipulate myself using my own narcissism to do it. And she said, keep doing it. I said, you don't care that it's phony? She goes, absolutely not. So I just like you treat me better. That kind of floored me. I said, is that it? People just want to be treated better. Respect, nice, simple things too. Some bigger things, but very simple things day after day. And that's how I did it. But the thing is, it was 3.5 years ago. I started 4 years. 4 years ago. I still have to do it every day. I have to think about it. It does not come naturally. And what I found out, and I tried it with other people I knew, friends and kids, they all noticed this. And then I broke the code and I said, no, it's just me manipulating myself and everything. But they all were very happy with this, even though it was phony in that sense. They said, you're trying, you're doing it, and you're really acting better. And I don't act badly. I'm just don't act good.
No, but I love what you're saying. And just to sort of summarize what you're saying, and I just want to respect your time, and I want to say that we need to continue this conversation. I'd love to invite you back on this podcast. But for this particular time, I want to actually add power, what I think is another layer to what you've just said. It is powerful how you use your own ability to self-regulate, to actually self-regulate yourself. And my research has been in the non-conscious, conscious mind, brain, mind stuff. And one of the things that I have spent years researching and teaching people through my practice and whatever, and research and books and techniques, is this: when you have self-awareness and when you self-regulate, you're using your mind to retrain your brain. Your brain just has to do what your mind tells it to do. And you've kind of, even though I'm not talking about, it's separate but inseparable. So you've actually done that. You chose to be self-aware. You chose to use you've been almost harsh on yourself to use your narcissism to manipulate yourself against yourself.
Only way I could get a foot in there,
But it's a positive thing. You've actually done a really positive thing. You've actually shown the power of a beautiful mind, a desire to actually change. You've used your mind to change change your brain. And one of the things I've researched is how long does it take to change thought? People always talk about 21 days and habits, which is nonsense. Neuroplasticity, as you know, the field of neuroplasticity, habits don't form in 21 days, which is just a myth. It actually takes at least 63 days and cycles of that. So your friends and family started noticing after about 9 to 12 weeks, and you constantly have to work at it. So you've really as defined how we as humans can take whatever character trait that's come through genetically or whatever, and we can actually with our minds change that. And it does take time, it does take effort, it's a continual process. Yes, your case is slightly more extreme, but you've done an amazing thing, and it's a story of hope. So for me as a scientist, I'm looking at you and listening to you with fascination and seeing a case study in action of someone who has been self-aware and self-regulated. So I want to say that's amazing. I want to congratulate you and say to you, like one of my, just listening to you, I feel like the research I've done has been fulfilled, So thank you so much.
It's useful.
I love it. I love what you've said, and I'd love to interview you more, but I have another interview to do. So I would love to invite you back on the podcast. Sure. I think it's been amazing. I think you've absolutely, what you've done is a message of hope. You may not realize that, but it is that's why people are so fascinated to hear your story, because you're giving hope to people. So I want to say thank you for that, even though you may not have thought about it like that.
It turns out we're not. I always thought we were our genes, and it turns out I was wrong. You can overcome your genes.
Yes, you can.
But you got to stay at it. You can't. It's not like losing 20 pounds and then going back to your habits. I have to do it every day.
You have to do it every day.
Mindful. I have very mindful of it, and
that's amazing. That's what for 38 years I've been teaching people, that your mind can overcome your genes, and you've got to be at it. I didn't even realize this was going to go this way, but I'm so excited, and I want to thank you.
I would never have believed it. I was the poster boy to all my colleagues and friends of your genetics set you, and Absolutely wrong on that one.
Well, now you my poster boy for how mind can change brains. So I'm so excited about that. So thank you for your brilliance, your time.
Great talking to you. And if you want me back, if you want.
I would love to. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Thank you. I hope you found today's podcast interesting and helpful. If you want more tips and help with managing anxiety, depression, and mental health, be sure to visit my website at drleaf.com and to sign up for my weekly newsletter, where I also include a schedule of my speaking events and so much more. And follow me on social media. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Just look for Dr. Caroline Leaf. Also, I love seeing all your posts on social media about this podcast. I love seeing what resonates with you and what you've learned. So be sure to continue posting and tagging me and letting me know what you think and how these tips worked out for you. And don't forget, leave a review and keep spreading the word about this podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I really hope you learned something new and helpful. Till then, I'm Dr. Caroline Leaf. This podcast represents the opinions of myself and my guests. The content here should not be taken as medical advice. The content here is for educational and informational purposes only. Please consult your healthcare professional for any individual medical questions you may have. While we make every effort to ensure that the information we are sharing is accurate, we welcome any comments, suggestions, or corrections of errors.